Yeah, I think we kind of decentralized it and gave it to ourselves.
We're taking the power back.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not going to any sort of board member to ask who's going to be on the podcast.
No, exactly.
We're going to do it.
Yeah, that's what Joe Rogan said when he signed up for Spotify and got hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever. The number keeps growing, how much he got actually. But that was his only thing, is like, I have absolute
autonomy,
100% power over the show. Whatever guests I want to bring on, I can bring on. Mm-hmm. Whatever I want to do, I can do. You can never tell me I can't do this.
Wow.
And then they're like, sure. And then they signed it,
Sounds good to us. We're just worried about our margins.
Yeah, well, I mean, their stock went up like 3 or 4 times. So.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So think of the billions and billions of dollars. So they did an investment of 100-something million and made billions. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, fine.
I'll take the heat all day long.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr.
Jones.
Yes.
Dr. Jones.
Indiana. It's amazing. What's his name? How many planes has he crashed?
Legitimately? Is he a pilot?
Yeah.
Harrison Ford?
Harrison Ford. Dude, there's pictures. You should see how many planes he's crashed.
Does the FAA,
and he's still alive.
Has the FAA not been like, Mr. Ford,
really these private planes just laying on the ground?
Really?
Yeah, like he had one that was really bad.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, you have to look it up.
Why does he keep? Whatever. I like.
Maybe, well, I think he does. I think when he was younger, he was doing that racing.
Oh, he used to race airplanes.
Yeah, that's pretty sketchy. So if you're being aggressive,
like those Red Bull guys.
Yeah,
I love flying.
Mm-hmm.
I like the casual aspect of it. Would I want to be in like a MiG or something and just absolutely punch it to like 45,000 feet, maybe 50, just like full throttle?
Just make me pass out? Yeah.
Yeah, I would. But for the majority of my time, I like to take it slow and easy. I like to ride the Cadillac of the skies. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Good old happy little, fixed wing Cessna sitting down there on the bottom.
Yeah. What was that golfer that died and the plane was just, everybody had died in the plane. This was in the 90s and the plane was just flying on autopilot for hours.
How'd they die?
They had to wait for it to, I think it was decompression or something, but they had to wait for the plane to run out of gas.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then it finally crashed. But it was like no response, no nothing, and everybody was dead on board.
So
it was just flying. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It reminds me of, and I've mentioned this before, the Matrix movies, because I love them so much, because I think it shows a lot to what our reality is. But where they're in the elevator, and they got all the weapons and stuff, and
great scene.
And they're just sitting there, and there's like elevator music going.
Yeah, great scene.
And then the doors open, and then it's just pure chaos.
Mm-hmm.
But in that brief moment, there was this really quiet. Yeah. I was meditating this morning, and my brain was just like, just like
thought after thought
after thought, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna calm down. I need to relax, and so I'm relaxing, trying to, and then I got like in this real peaceful moment, and I thought it was a long time, and I looked because I was like proud of myself. Ego was like, great job,
Good
Jason.
job, Jason. You
6 hours. I mean, not 6 hours. 6 minutes and 40 seconds.
Hey, listen, it's amazing how still a moment can feel for a long time in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's what they were doing in an airplane on autopilot. They were meditating.
Yeah.
Transcended.
Well, it's a form of meditation if we want to get into.
No, let's not. I'm
gonna, dude. I bait you so bad.
Don't please.
I always bait. You guys notice this if you've been listening to us for a while. I'm just this secret quiet guy, just hanging out over here asking questions, and then occasionally I'm like, I'm gonna try this on him.
Yeah,
it's a risk assessment always with you and me, isn't it?
I'm always thinking about it. What's the risk on this? the State Farm commercial? Like, $1. Yeah, that's what you're doing to me every time. I'm like, give me that.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you're in a plane, what do you get in a plane? What do they call that view? Bird's eye view.
Yeah, bird's eye view. Yeah.
When you fly across the United States, you're like, oh, now I can see how the Rockies kind of go up.
Mm-hmm.
This point, I can see how the land changes. I can actually see patterns from above. There's a lot of interesting things happen when I'm up here. And so archaeology, it's moving towards that more data-driven process. Not necessarily them being a plane and taking hard photographs, but
having drones with infrared.
Infrared. They use, ground penetrating radar. Right. They're using satellite imagery. Now, when you have this bird's eye view, the whole idea here about this article that we're going to get into is that you have more to test against.
Yeah, and the Journal of Field Archaeology devoted entirely issue to discussing the myriad ways of which large-scale data sets and associated analytics are transforming the field.
And it is transforming the field because rather than us just looking at this as archaeologists and we're like, oh my gosh, we didn't realize there was another part over here, a part over here. You can see the patterns of these small societies or civilizations. You can now look at it from a greater, more macro view so that when you come down with the micro view with your picks and your brushes to move away the dirt and everything.
Right.
Now you're like, oh, now I can see the interaction and the interplay. Now I can guide myself to be like, we need to be digging over here. Rather than just saying, oh, we dug here. Oh, look, it seems to be expanding. Let's look at the whole picture and then come to some sort of consensus with it. Now we can test against a larger model.
Yeah, the National Museum of Ethnology in Japan, they developed 2 online databases and used them to bring a fresh perspective to the forced resettlement of the Inca Empire in the 1570s by the Spanish conquerors.
Yeah, so this was really cool. The Incan Empire had been around for a while. So when the Spanish came in, they're like, man, this is a huge amount of territory. First of all, how did the Incas manage this territory?
Mm-hmm.
And beyond the management, how did they move themselves? Like, how did they even come to some sort of consensus of this is where we should develop this little civilization, this one here, and this one here? And what they found by taking these bird's eye views with these databases and stitching it all together is that the Spanish mirrored the same exact paths. So they're like, if we need to manage this civilization, like the Incas have been managing it, if we're going to take it over, we need to use whatever their system was.
Yeah, and what's funny is, and we did this here in the United States, is they use roads, and then those populations were around the roads.
Yeah,
what they found.
Yeah, and when you have that bird's eye view, you can analyze all those roads. You can understand, wow, the Spanish just used what was already there as an infrastructure.
Yeah, and so, but there is this ego rub of traditional field work compared to these tools of big data, and I know they're not throwing in the trowel. The article said that I can't take
kills
credit
me,
for it.
yeah, it kills me now.
But they were discussing how there's got to be a balance between the two approaches.
Yeah.
And there's some drawbacks to tapping into the power of scale. And then there's this really old school. I mean, archaeology is really old school.
Everybody wants to be
it's like,
Indiana Jones.
Yeah, no one wants to have. It's like, no, the trowel's our best tool, not the computer.
Yeah, this is time tested.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad it's time tested, but now here's a new tool to help elevate your work. It's not here to replace it.
Right.
You know, it's like when human labor wigs out when they start seeing like robots going into warehouses. That's honestly the proper thing that should be happening. But if you think about it, I don't want to get into it. So for an archaeologist, it's like, well, how do I stop being such a Luddite and start to accept this technology and say this can actually advance my research more so than I thought before? And I'll give an interesting insight on this. George Mallory was, I forget what the gentleman climbed, was one of the first dudes to climb Everest.
That's right.
No one was ever sure if he made it to the top, but they did find his dead body there. He like snapped his femur in half or, what have you, froze to death. Typical Everest. But there was someone, down below, like the Sherpas looking up, observing him, and he has to go up and do that observation of him physically being there in some sort of dangerous setting or scenario. And after that, the people that were in search of George Mallory's body, there were some, individuals that had studied Everest deeply, and they took a bunch of aerial photos. And then they stitched all these things together to create some sort of map. And then with that map, they took their microcosm of information for what was recorded from the people in George Mallory's presence. And then they took the greater map, this, more forward technology, and brought both of them together to say, this is probably where his body is. So then it led those researchers to go out on Everest and be like, let's search this area. And so when you do take out your trowel and everything else, you're digging in the right spot.
Yeah. And archaeologists, it says, generally think of field collected data as the gold standard. And then they say, we tend to think of people as the main instrument of observation. So as an archaeologist, so it's the field data that they're receiving from people, and then people are interpreting that information.
So every time a person interprets something, there's bias.
Right.
Every time. Everybody has their own perspective, right? Any sort of emotional stance when they recover an object. The satellite taking the imagery or the UAV drone was built by a human being. It's just an eyeball that doesn't have a belief system. It's an eyeball that is strictly observing. It has no emotional stance on what it's observing. It just is doing what it's doing. So it's not that what's going on with the drone is any different from, how a person looks at something. It's just that how the person then interprets it. Mm-hmm. The drone just says, here you go, here's the data.
Yeah, and I liked how the article brought in climate change, because that's one of the big issues at TARTLE that we're trying to help humanity with.
One of the major issues. It's actually
And
the top
it gives,
issue, yeah.
but it gives specifics. It just doesn't throw this political, climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that is driven by climate change. In Peru, we see this very concretely through intensifying El Nino events, which triggers all kinds of flooding on the north coast of Peru, and it's been destroying sites.
It does. It destroys sites. And there's other places within the jungle canopy that you can't see through, and you're required to use, penetrating satellites to go through that jungle canopy, where you send radar and you can actually bounce through that crop,
Right.
whatever it might be, and see what's underneath it. And when you look at climate change, if you start like burning these forests down, like a rainforest, well, what if something was built in that rainforest? What if there was some lost Amazonian tribe and we just torched the entire thing? We didn't know it because they had thatch roof shacks.
Right.
And me as the cattle farming guy on the outside is just like, hey, whatever, man, it burnt like any other old tree. But it's important that we look at what we're doing and how those effects are actually systemic, and they can affect archaeology. It can actually destroy our history. That climate change is interesting. If we're worried about looking at our past so we don't repeat the same mistakes, well, let's not make a stupid mistake now that's just going to wipe our past out altogether.
Yeah, and that's something that we're looking at more and more, especially when you see things, and that's what disturbs me right now, is when we're trying to erase history.
Yeah.
In lots of different ways, and may not even realize it. It's like I always want, when I go to Germany, I always want to see the concentration camps. I would hate for them to bulldoze them down and they just disappear. They have to be there. You have to be able to walk into these gas chambers and realize how horrific humans can be if we don't have moral and ethics.
Yeah, if we cannot take a logical line of cause and effect into our past, look at it and analyze it properly, like any good data scientist would do, how are we supposed to know we're taking the right path into the future, right? You got to analyze those cause and effects. And if you're talking about the biggest eraser of human history, that is climate change that negatively impacts us. At that point, you're not worried about the history. You're worried about you, because it's just going to wipe all you out. And then there's no history to even be recorded at that point.
Yeah, there's one of the archaeologists he was talking about, when he was talking about field archaeology, and I love this. He said 90% of what I've done has been survey and excavation in the field. I've worked in the same valley in the Andes for 25 years, so this guy's an expert.
I'm a little jealous.
Well, he said that's not unusual. People will pick sites and then work them years and years.
Yeah.
Archaeologists tend to specialize geographically, and they tend to get to know a place intimately. I'm a big advocate for that. We're hyper conscious of the fact this is kind of a godlike view you get from viewing the surface of the earth from everywhere and nowhere at once, brings with it a lot of risk. And he's talking about looking at satellite imaging and stuff like that.
Is it risk, or is the fact that it upsets their perspective because they're too close?
Well, that's what he gets into that. Actually, he gets into how do you understand the culture of an ancient tribe, and then that's so much variable. And then now you're taking these sites and then you're putting dogma into it.
Yeah.
And then you're making a decision on how these people lived.
Think about like interpretations of Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Yes.
They know the flavor and tone of what, that little raven or the crow is on the thing. But when you put the combination of it together, it's really the gathered perspective over time where someone says, oh, this is how they must have felt. Don't tell me this is how they must have felt. I want to know for a fact. And if I can't know for a fact, then leave it at that. It's impossible for you to know an ancient civilization, truly know who they are, without directly contacting them.
Yeah, and he gets into it. It's because there's so much specialization that you have this micro historical way. And so, yeah, you may have an Inca empire, but then you have all these different sites with all these people that have worked 25 plus years on them. And he says, as an aggregate, when we look at all these random studies, being able to take that data and put it together and then analyze it, and then find these similarities and causes that, now we start to assimilate truth.
Remove the biases from each of those guys' data sets.
Yes, exactly. But you have to holistically understand the entire system.
Yeah, you can't just have, a microcosm view and say, I know it.
Right.
That's an unbalanced perspective of this world. You need to have both. If you don't live in balance, then you don't have the full picture.
No.
And they're saying that this microcosm is frankly more important than the macrocosm. Well, how is that to say for the entire Earth or the universe that we're sitting in?
Yeah, and so they actually appreciate the generalized model of big data because everything is so localized.
It's localized, and they can test against that model. It just gives them more things to test their hypothesis
Right.
against. It strengthens their case.
Yeah, and I like how they went into the Inca Empire a little bit more. They were talking about at its peak in the 16th century, and they said this: if the Inca Empire were in the Old World, it would stretch from St. Petersburg in the north to Cairo in the south.
St. Petersburg.
So,
I'm looking at the map.
So St. Petersburg in Russia.
That's a huge.
Yeah,
well,
that's
yeah,
all the way over there, all the way to
obviously,
Egypt.
if I
Yeah.
took South America and put it up here, yeah, okay, duh.
So
Why would you say that? Why wouldn't you just use South America?
Yeah, so it's
What kind of a like?
he's probably European, and so it's enormous. That's a big data challenge that encompasses over 5 modern republics in today's term. Millions of people, dozens of groups, and one of the most geographically diverse areas, from the driest deserts in the world to the wettest rainforests in the world, and everything in between as you go up the Andes on one side and down the other.
Yeah.
And so now you have, Spanish conquest, and then you have with history, we've created this narrative on Spanish conquest.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're taking that narrative.
Does it fit the narrative?
Yes, and then putting that into this form of domination into these little microcosmic studies. So now, do you see where this goes?
Yeah, I do. It's just some, I don't know. We don't have to beat on the archaeologists. I love archaeology. I really do, but this is like a little off.
They asked this question, though. How do you ensure the quality of your data sets, particularly in a field like archaeology, where you're often dealing with imperfect or incompetent information?
And
they actually said that, and then they're asking the archaeologists. Yeah. He said this: we've been careful to structure Geopacha as a peer review kind of system internally, which I like that. It is crowdsourced in that many people are working on it, but it's not just wide open crowdsourcing. We have teams of researchers who are experts in their fields. They have come to the project with specific research questions that they want to address. Mm-hmm. They're working with their students, and the students are working directly with them as regional editors for their project.
Okay.
They review their team site identifications, and then we as the journal editors do the final review on those before they are committed to the database. So this is, to me, So no. So you're seeing exactly where I'm seeing.
It reminds me of the old newspaper model.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Where the editor in chief has all.
No matter all the good stuff you write, the editor in chief can be like, nope or yep.
Because they have regional editors and general editors to make sure that nothing was missed and that they don't have false negatives. But then you have bias, and if those it depends on those regional editors and general editors. So let me because I want to shove TARTLE into this model, where if you could take your editors, you could take your students, you could take these people that are working on these sites, and let's say there's 5,000 of them.
Yeah.
And then out of those 5,000 people, that they could remain anonymous. Yeah. So they're not putting because in higher academia,
their reputation and stuff on it.
Because in higher academia, one false move and you're done. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, and a lot of people don't want to take that risk.
No, but if you're anonymous, you're willing to share.
And then we start asking questions to these 5,000.
Let's do the Peruvian archaeologist data packet.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, and then you would be able to find, if people knew they were truly anonymous and it was encrypted through blockchain, like there was absolutely no way that they could find out, and you start asking them questions related to this as experts.
Yeah.
Now you're going to get a lot more truthful data set.
Yeah, rather than someone worried about saying the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how many doctors don't want to come out with their way of doing something, and then the field, so many people just hammer them.
Mm-hmm.
Or people that come out against the dairy industry and just get walloped by these lobbyists.
Yes.
Just hammered.
Yes.
Or people that come out against pharma because they have some other nutraceutical thing or some sort of holistic organic approach, homeopathic, and they just get destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely obliterated. And then everyone's like, well, I don't want to come out now.
Yeah, I was listening to a PhD doctor last night, and he was talking about schizophrenia and cannabis. And so the studies are, because we have this war on drugs, and all drugs are bad.
Why is it a war? Why is everything a freaking
war? I know, yeah. And so they were saying, the studies were showing that cannabis doesn't, people were saying it causes schizophrenia. They're saying it doesn't cause schizophrenia. It can elevate because you get paranoid on.
You're already schizophrenic.
Yeah, you may have you may be leaning in that direction, which what they were talking about, one of the main researchers for schizophrenia, world leaders in this, he was saying basically how schizophrenia, if you want to view it this way, is this gets into our language episode, and you're going to love this. When you talk to me, I'm looking at your mouth, I'm looking at your eyes, I'm looking at your body language, and I'm interpreting how I want to interpret it. Whether it may be right or wrong, I don't know.
How do you feel about me right now?
Yeah, but I'm I mean, yeah, you kind of have like you're thinking.
You know,
like,
this is my thinking phase.
Yeah, you're thinking. You got your arms crossed. You know, you're paying attention to what I'm saying. That's what I'm viewing. You may be thinking about.
No, I'm thinking about what you're saying.
10 other things, but those ads you've been getting.
Ridiculous. This is why you have VPNs, folks.
Yeah. So he was saying somebody that's schizophrenic just has this ability to be able to view that thought process in a different way. So they're looking at it and saying, you know, well, they're interpreting it differently. That's all schizophrenia is an interpretation. Like I'm looking at you now, and if I was schizophrenic, I would interpret, well, is Alex upset at me? You know, Alex is against me. You know, what is he plotting against me? You see what I'm saying? So it's just a thought process, which we know how powerful thoughts are, and I'm not teeing you up.
Is this
for
what
that.
is this what these? You want $1? So this is what these professionals are saying.
Yes.
I don't know jack about schizophrenia.
Yeah.
But that's quite interesting.
But doesn't that sound interesting? That because to me that gives hope. Instead of saying, you know, cannabis is bad or schizophrenia, you know, you have this, you know, huge. Because we're all mental in some form. I mean, you could probably study me a bunch. You know this. You could study me a bunch and come up with all kinds of.
I'd be scared what I found on you.
Yeah. All those 4-letter and 3-letter abbreviations, they're all for me.
Oh, yeah.
So, but it gives you hope because it's like, this is just a thought process that you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so let's work on changing your thought process. Or maybe this is you and you have a different view in all these different dimensions.
Come on.
I tease you. We won't get into that. Just
you want $20? Here's $20.
So let's end this podcast with this.
Thank you.
Where would you like to see this field? They asked this leading expert. Where would you like to see this field go over the next 10 years?
Yep.
What's your vision for how this might all come together? And I want you to speak to this second part. Cooperation and ethical intersection are the two things I think are most important. These two parallel tracks in terms of data aggregation that are going on right now. We've got initiatives like Open Context, which is a pioneer in open data for archaeology, plus another initiatives. But I like the ethical introspection.
Yeah.
And that's something at TARTLE, because I want to bridge it to the ethical introspection with TARTLE and get into a little bit how cooperation and ethical intersection.
Yeah. How did we acquire this data? Was it ethical in the way we acquired it? I'm fortunate enough to speak with some of the most renowned anthropologists in the world for social determinants of health. Lucky me. Because I created a tool like a good pick that is ethical, that allows them to source information where it's like, wow, I can feel good about what I got. And it's also better than what I was getting. Because right now for, you know, people that are in these research, these research positions, sometimes they get data, they're like, where did this come from? Like in all seriousness, like you look at the guy that delivered to you, it's like, where'd you get this? You know, how did you get it? And they're bummed out because it's all they have to use, even though they know it was sourced like unethically. So when you talk about like the collective or the collaborative coming together, it's the same concept of what we're talking about with everybody across the globe coming together to solve something. That's that collective. And if you can do that collective unity for solving an issue or whatever it might be, an analysis of a geological site, you can do it ethically and you can really feel good about that process. And just because some things are ethical doesn't mean they have to be inefficient, right? And it doesn't mean that they have to be ridiculously expensive. It doesn't need to work like that. You know, you just had to have the proper architecture to come together and have that sort of tool for that sort of solve. So when I look at that, I think it's fantastic what they're talking about. That is the future. And whatever is going on with the social determinant of health, or if you're down in Peru trying to study a civilization, they're all going to share in what that new macro trend is. And the macro trend is the acquisition of data ethically and putting that together collectively to solve what needs to be solved.
Perfect. I just glanced at your watch and it's 11:11, so we're out.